All right. As much as I hate to cut Janice off, we do have Q&A. Please welcome Bob Sarles, director, and writer Joel Selvin. Congratulations, guys. So, from my understanding, this film really started with your book, Joel. So maybe take us back to that time when you were writing this book.
So I first, is this working? Do you care? I first ran across Bert Berns' name in a book, History of Rock and Roll by a guy named Charlie Gillett, The Sound of the City, and I read the book in 1970, and it mentioned a handful of records that Berns did. And I immediately understood that there was a common element to these records, a kind of urgency and almost hysteria, and became fascinated with the guy. Then I'd ask people about him and get strange answers, like, ooh, you know, or, oh, wow, and not much information out there. Eventually, in 1993, they were going to make a movie about Janis Joplin's life, and they were thinking of having Melissa Etheridge play Janis Joplin. So she came up to San Francisco to sit in with Big Brother and the Holding Company, and I went to see that. That was an interesting concept, and I'm there at the Maritime Hall with all the hippies, and somebody says, hey, you know, Bert Berns' daughter is here. I go, what? So I went backstage and I met Cassandra Burns, and her brother, Brett, was supposed to be there, but he was sick and at the hotel room. And he and I met up about 2 weeks later, and we stayed up to about 4 in the morning in my basement record library. I was playing in 45s he's never heard, and he was telling me stories about gangsters and stuff. And that was like Brett remembers the night as well as I do. So that became the beginning of this book. And the book was the beginning of Brett and Cassie, like pulling all this stuff together. And they started on a Broadway musical, which will be in New York next year. And then the documentary, they started shooting the documentary. And then Bob came in. And all this stuff starts coming together like 16 years after it started. I started my book in 1998. It was published in 2014. The musical, they spent 12 years, and they had a 10-week off-Broadway run in 2014. How long did they work on the movie before you?
About 7-8 years.
Yeah, 7-8 years. So about 10 years on the movie, and it shows up in 2015. You know, how they planned it, I don't know, but they're brilliant, and I love them, and I'm sorry they're not here tonight. Oh, you did this year.
So, once you came onto the film, what was there before and what changed after you came on board?
Well, Brett had spent about 7 years interviewing all these people, and to his credit, he got some good people to help him shoot it. It looked good, and he got some great people. And you know, I have people, because I have a bit of a body of work doing music documentaries. I often get people coming to me, you know, asking for advice. Somehow they think I've got access to money, which is absurd. But you know, the best advice I can give them is, whether you have money or not, start shooting, because people are mortal, and they will drop dead on you. You know, in the process of trying to tell a story. It's happened to me. It took me 25 years to make a documentary about Michael Bloomfield. One of the good things about that was I learned my craft during those 25 years. Another good thing is I was able to get interviews with people like Bill Graham and Chet Helms before they left us. So one of the great things that Brett did was get a lot of these people, many of whom are not with us anymore. And by the time I got introduced to Brett, which was after Joel doing a book reading on his book, I was living in Sherman Oaks at the time, and he was doing a book reading in West Hollywood. So if you know LA, that's a big commitment to go over the hill, you know, on a Sunday. at Brett we all went out for Chinese food afterwards, a bunch of Joel's music friends, David Ritz and Art Fine and all these crazy people. And I found myself sitting next to Bert Berns. And I was like, wow, it's really, your dad's got a really interesting story. And he said, well, I've been, the last 7-8 years, we've been shooting all these interviews and I kind of have a cut together. And I said, well, if you ever need any help, that's, my wife and I have a little production company and that's kind of what we do. And he said, I know that. Selvin's been talking you up to me for 5 years. I didn't realize I was being set up on a blind date, but that's kind of what happened. And then around, a number of months after that, Brett invited me over to his place and showed me this cut. And it showed me that the potential in these interviews was astounding. I really was very impressed with what he got on camera. I was less impressed with how he had put it together. And I asked him, what he thought I could do for him. And he said, well, I think if I hire you for a couple months, maybe you can do like a Ken Burns polish on it. And I reached for my jacket and I said, I have no interest. And he stopped me and he said, well, why? I said, well, you've got a Scorsese film here. You don't want to make the kid listen to a Ken Burns film. We'll put people to sleep. We want to wake people up here. Nothing against Ken Burns. If he ever offered me a job, I'd be glad to take it. But he has a certain style of filmmaking that I didn't felt lend itself to this particular subject. And I told him if he could bring my wife, who's my filmmaking partner, Christine, who's not here tonight, in on this, and we can work as a team. It's going to take a lot longer than a couple of months. But I think if we break the back of this and bring in a lot more elements, the deep research that Christina did to find all these wonderful images of New York in the 50s and 60s, all these photographs. If we did a graphic treatment, executed so wonderfully by our graphic director, Steve Ogden, who's here. Steve, give a, there he is. Even all the animation, the graphic version. And if we did a recreate, I just had an idea that we could really up the production value on this thing. But most importantly, what I thought I could add to it was finding the story. As we got into one of the reasons that Brett liked my previous films is I often work without any narration. And he liked that. He can hope that maybe we could do this film without any narration. So as I started going through the footage, I realized that, sort of a first-time filmmaker's mistake. You can get a little bit starstruck sometimes and maybe not get all the bullet points you need. If you don't know what you're doing in the interview process, maybe you won't get all the information, all the narrative out of the interviews that you need at the time. So we had to find a way to do that. I naturally went to Joel's book for research, and then I realized there was an audio book version of the book. It was 14 hours long. But I got I downloaded it, I hacked it, and got it into my editing machine. And out of Joel's book, I extracted, which is around 400 pages, I think, of narrative and information.
Is that you speaking on the audio version?
No, good God. That was sort of a generic voice artist, a guy with a Kentucky accent. It's totally wrong, but so we had the film cut using the scratch track that we had extracted from the audio book. To fill in the narration. And then we discussed, this was an opportunity now to get a narrator to maybe add a little bit of, glitz and glamour, get a celebrity in there to help sell the film. And we were knocking around ideas, and Brett told me that he had Steven coming as one of the producers on the Broadway musical. I said, you're talking to Steven Van Zandt? He said, yeah, about a couple times a week. And I said, well, ask him if he'll narrate the thing. And Steven did. So I think that Steven's voice was sort of the last element that really gives the film the feel that it does. It's sort of, that it's Joel's words, and then as performed, by Sylvia. And I think it's just the right attitude for the film.
Yeah.
Did anything change in the writing for you once you knew Steven was going to be recording it?
Well, I must say, you guys all were laughing, right? It's not funny in the book. I don't know how that works, but I didn't know I was funny.
And you're happy with that, right?
Oh yeah, no, thanks for coming.
Well, let's hear your thoughts and questions. Raise your hand and have the microphone come over to you.
The film was fabulous. I really think your wife deserves a lot of credit. I thought the vintage clips added so much to the interviews. I mean, just broadened visually and deepened the whole feeling of actually being in the time with him. It was absolutely wonderful. Very 360 degree because of those clips.
Well, on behalf of Christina, thank you. A lot of it is serendipity too. We shot a lot of B-roll. I made a couple trips to New York. I shot a lot of exteriors of buildings, just using a little handy cam. I had a Super 8 camera and some stuff just to get some B-roll shots. But I went there in September. It was just we needed some winter stuff. I mean, Christina found that wonderful shot of going through Central Park. I asked her, I said, wouldn't it be great if we could find a shot, traveling through Central Park, and 24 hours later she found this footage for me. But if you remember I guess it was 2 years ago? I'm losing tracks because we've been working on this film for so long. But the December that we were finishing up the film, so it would have been a year ago December, there was a huge storm in New York, crippled the city, like a once-in-a-century storm. And so I called up, a cameraman buddy of mine who lives in Manhattan. I said, get down to 1650 and get a shot of that sign with all the snow coming on it. And Cassie was living at that point on the Upper West Side, just a couple blocks from the Riverside Chapel. And she ran out there and got that shot with her iPhone of the Riverside Memorial Chapel under all the snow. And because the city was shut down, there were no cars in the street. So there was nothing to betray that this wasn't 1968 in the film. So, these are just happy accidents and miracles.
It was like visualizing our unconscious thoughts. It was like the image would be there just as I was thinking about it from dialogue. Great.
Question
Next
here?
question is right here.
I can't believe that I don't know who this guy is. He wrote some of my favorite songs I've ever my entire life. And so I'm very happy that now I know who he is. Thank you so much for doing that. I have a question since I didn't know who he was, and I'm wondering, how did Janis Joplin find that song, or did she know him?
That was a big hit record on R&B radio. So Janis Joplin heard that record on KDIA here in Oakland, and it was only 6 months, 8 months before on the radio. It was like a current record that she put in the Big Brother and the Holding Company set. And Sam Andrew of Big Brother, he said, that he thinks that, most times white rock bands will take a R&B song and rough it up or smooth it out, that they took this one and roughed it up. But yeah, no, it was a current record. It just, and it was a top 10 record, R&B, but didn't mean it was on the top 40.
Sam Andrew actually told me that it was Jack Cassidy who introduced Big Brother to that song.
Yeah, that's not true.
Is that true?
No, that's not true. That's a nice story. Yeah. No, that record was all over the radio, and we all heard it on KDIA. Yeah.
The real answer to that is that although I've kind of, I think, developed a bit of a reputation for people that know me as a music documentarian, in fact, I've been making a living at this for 4 decades now, hard to believe. It really represents a sliver of the work that I've done over the years. And my real craft is as a film editor. And to me, it's a craft of storytelling. And it doesn't matter whether I'm, right now Christina and I are working on a film about Mata Hari, not a music subject at all. And I've, worked on scores of, what they call reality television. To me, it doesn't matter what the project is. I'm a storyteller, and I'm trying to tell the story in a way that an audience will be able to understand it. And it's not enough for them to understand the story. And I learned this doing reality television. You gotta sort of lasso them with something so that you can hang on to their attention until after the next commercial break. Something I learned in television, you know, how to create an arc, how to create hooks. And this is all just part of the craft of editing. So for me, it's just natural when I take on a subject like this. This was, you know, this is the story. The problem wasn't, you know, finding the story. The problem was finding which story to tell, because there were so many stories. You know, the trick is to try to find the story that has a through line to go all the way through. What I would say to Brett a lot of times, because, you know, there were parts of the story that aren't here. There's, you know, stories that we edited that it didn't make the film. You know, one of them is
Jimmy Page.
One of the artists that Bert discovered in England was Jimmy Page, who was a young session player, and he plays the classic riff on "Here Comes the Night," and he loved him, and he wanted to bring him over to the States, and eventually he did. He convinced Jimmy Page to come over to the States. Jimmy Page lived in the penthouse when Brett was a baby, and for like 6 weeks he was introduced to the guys over at Atlantic, Ahmet and Jerry, and that may very well have been why Led Zeppelin wound up on Atlantic. If Bert Berns had lived, perhaps they would have wound up on Bang. Entirely plausible. What was my point? I lost my point.
Why didn't it make it into the film?
Why didn't it make it into the film? Well, we never got an interview with Jimmy Page, but we did have this archival interview from 1994 in which he tells his part of the story. We also had an interview with Jerry Wexler, but we weren't able to get the permissions from the Wexler family. I can't imagine. So we had to figure out what to do about this thing. What are we going to do now? You know, we were holding out hope that we might get an interview with Jimmy Page, and then finally, you know, these decisions needed to be made. We were coming up against this screening at South by Southwest, so I did a cut and I put it up on Vimeo for Brett to see, and he called me back and he said, "Wow, that was better. What'd you do?" And I said, "I took the Jimmy Page story out." He says, "No, you can't do that." And I said, "But you said it was better." And that's part of the process of filmmaking. You know, in the editing room we call it killing our babies. You know, sometimes you have to chop a few limbs off the tree to stay true to the story, because it wasn't the Jimmy Page story. Now in the book, it's a very interesting beat, and you can do that in a book. But in a film, you have to be very selective so as to keep your audience's attention. And you have to be able to make them laugh a little bit. You have to make them cry a little bit. So hopefully you did a little bit of both in watching. At this point, I want to share something with you that I feel like I
Get some more questions.
I got to share something.
Okay, well, you know.
Sadly, this is important information. Sadly, 2 weeks ago, Eileen Burns passed away. So this is very fresh in the Burns family. They're kind of going through a serious mourning right now. Eileen was a very dynamic person. You know, and I think one of the stars of the film. And very fortunately, a couple months ago, we had a screening at the Miami Film Festival, Miami Jewish Film Festival, and Eileen finally got to see the film in front of an audience for the first time. So that was and although I had a telephone relationship with Eileen, I never met her in person. So I finally got to meet her, and then a month after that, she passed away. So sadly, I just want to inform you of that.
Just a quick question. I know a lot of times in music documentaries, the film is held up because of licensing, because you have to have the rights for